The other day, I saw an infant dressed in a lace pink dress with matching ribbons sported throughout the hair. Without even a pause, my initial thought was, wow, she's adorable, as I'm sure many others would agree. However, it dawned on me that I had made the assumption that the baby was a she based upon a color. It was in this instance that I needed to take a step back. Why did I associate the color pink with the female gender? Why does the color blue automatically connect to the word boy? These questions led to a whirlwind of thoughts that required me to examine how gendered stereotypes have been able to affect our language and expectations. Understandably, our community and upbringing have much to do with our portrayal of the world, so I took it even a step further and questioned how the books we read as children can endorse these gender-based stereotypes. Consequently, finding many books that utilize stereotypical language that proceed to validate these false labels, which ultimately restrict, exclude, and suppress the many people who do not fit into society's well-defined categories. Unfortunately, gender-based stereotypes can have a negative effect on many children that identify with the LGBTQ+ community. Although gender-based language can be an unconscious form of habit, I believe that this talk will open up a window of awareness that might not have been previously present. If you were to walk through a supermarket, it would be assumed that you would find thousands of items stocked onto the shelves, each categorized by their own branding label. These labels not only provide products with an identity, but they also communicate all of the product-specific information. As well, we often associate our own connotations about these branded labels, as we differentiate between what is better quality and what should just be left on the shelves. This simplistic process of identifying supermarket items by labels has unexpectedly become a part of the way we identify people. However, unlike a can of soup, humans cannot be defined by definitive sets of labels. By placing an individual in a categorized box, we ultimately strip that person of their own unique identity. The novel Red, A Crayon Story is a prime example of how labels can lead to misidentification. As you can see, the character Red bears a red label but produces the color blue. In spite of this, the other characters fail to recognize Red's true identity because they allowed the established label to rule their perception. However, by continuing to impose an incorrect label on Red, the characters are unconsciously perpetuating stereotypes and oppressing Red from embracing Red's true identity. A label should be a description, not a prescription. By allowing a label to dictate a person's identity, we are ultimately depriving that individual from exploring and embracing the many complexities of their individual makeup. In addition, we often utilize these categorized boxes to further perpetuate gendered stereotypes, thus proceeding to implement limitations on what is and is not acceptable for a person to do. These limitations are created for an individual at an early age, consequently establishing what is expected of a child based upon being a boy or a girl, therefore generating expectations that can potentially have lasting and limiting consequences. Girls are connected to words that further perpetuate the illusion that females are passive, nurturing, emotional, and delicate, while boys are associated with words that are defined by masculinity, such as rough, strong, aggressive, and ambitious. However, what happens when a person steps outside of the tightly packaged box that describes boy and begins to embrace characteristics that are defined by femininity? In William's doll, the main character William experiences backlash from his friends and family because of his desire to play with a doll. As an object that is most often associated as a toy for young girls, William experienced repercussions for stepping outside of his gendered stereotype, thus leading his neighbor to call him a sissy, which indicates how William's interests automatically associate him with femininity. When young men are called words like sissy, wuss, or baby, they are ultimately being condemned for embracing any form of emotion that is associated with the female sex, which further reveals the way in which our cultural gendered norms shape our very language and perceptions, ultimately creating a single story for how to express and perform masculinity and femininity. As well, we are often pressured into categorizing our gendered identities based upon our gendered sex combined with traditional gendered roles, thus leading individuals who step outside of these social constructs to be labeled as confused, weird, or different. Specifically, these problematic labels can be particularly harmful to non-binary and gender non-conforming groups of people. As these labeled boxes continue to maintain the limitations of gendered expression, in the story I Am Jazz, the main character Jazz discusses her experience as a transgendered person and highlights moments in which she receives backlash for her gendered identity. As a baby, Jazz was labeled as a male. However, since an adolescent, she had identified herself as a girl, thus leading her to enjoy activities and interactions that are predominantly associated with femininity. However, there were moments within the book that displayed how the imposition of labels was causing Jazz to feel uncomfortable and abnormal. At the beginning of the year, they wanted me to use the boys' bathroom and play on the boys' team in gym class, but that didn't feel normal at all. It was only when Jazz's preconceived label was denied that she ultimately felt acceptance, therefore further articulating the limitations that labels can place on our identity. As humans, we are far too complex to be grouped together by superficial classifications. If we challenge gender-based stereotypes and labels, we can not only disconnect the link between gender and sex, but we can create a more inclusive environment. Think about a moment in your life in which you experienced a gender-based stereotype. How have masculine stereotypes prohibited your ability to be affectionate or emotional? How have feminine stereotypes placed limitations on your ability to voice your concerns without being deemed as overly emotional or unstable? I ask that you take the step to acknowledge how these gendered stereotypes have been implemented into your own language. By challenging these thought processes, we are ultimately tearing down the many labels that have attempted to define us to a single narrative. After all, labels are meant for soup cans.